Well, lots of controversy surrounding the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend with big changes announced by the FIA. I'll get onto that in a minute. It does affect all the teams, but of course some cars are a lot quicker than others, so it affects some cars more than others as well, and drivers as well. Obviously, before we get on to that, and I'll talk about that in a bit, just a quick rundown on the events of the day. Beautiful weather in Canada, although rain almost fell towards the end of the second session. Very few delays. Couple of virtual safety car moments, but that was about it. Very clean Friday from Montreal. First time back there, of course, since 2019. Great to be back. And let's get down to it and have a look and see what happened when the track in FP1 was obviously still very dirty, but a groove quickly comes in Canada. Soft Pirellis here, quite an abrasive surface and very, very gusty. A lot of drivers complaining about that. But it was the most interesting thing was to see which cars were bouncing a lot on the straights or not, and notably the Mercedes didn't seem to be bouncing as much, so they've obviously taken some downforce out of the car there according to the new regulations, which I'll talk about in a bit, but there was still some bouncing going on. You can see it particularly on the Alpines at one point, I thought. Anyway, this is what happened when they went out. First off, Max Verstappen just looked in a class of his own. It looked like for once everything went perfectly for him. Well, it didn't look like it. It did go perfectly for him. He was out of the pit lane quickly. Everything went according to plan. There was one moment, it was quite interesting actually. You don't often hear about this, but he was talking about the inside rear was off the ground, and he was talking about the stiffness of the rear roll bar, and quite interesting. Don't see that too often. Haven't heard roll bars talked about for a long time. Didn't even know they needed roll bars. They ran them so stiff anyway. But anyway, Max 15-1, 3-2-4 on the long straight through the trap before the final S-bend. So Red Bull, Honda still incredibly quick in a straight line. Carlos Sainz next quickest, 15-4. Ferraris look pretty good, but a little bit more iffy than the Red Bulls, if you get my gist. Well, Max is Red Bull anyway. Carlos on the limit doing that lap, I would say. 3-1-7, definitely slower in a straight line than the Red Bulls. A pattern we've seen. But look at P3 this morning. Fernando Alonso, and he was on the medium tyre. He ran a different tyre to everybody else. Classic Fernando, seems to do that all the time. I don't know if it's he just chooses to go a route that nobody else wants, or he knows what they're doing. He just does the opposite, just to psych everybody out. No idea. 15.5 for Fernando in the Alpine, top speed 3.18. And that was obviously with quite a lot of downforce, because we know how quick that car is. Really, really good lap. Really good lap. Medium tyres. Everyone's a bit shaken by that. Was it just a one-off? We will see as the day progressed. Sergio Perez 15.6, 3.26. He had a little bit quicker than Max, and there or thereabouts. Back to where he kind of normally is relative to Max. Now we're back on a circuit where there aren't many corners where Sergio can do what he does so well. That wonderful traction episode out of very slow corners that he's been so good on street circuits, particularly when it's bumpy. Lance Stroll looking good. The Aston Martin continuing to get better really, and it's starting to look like a really quick car now. Lance Stroll didn't finish Baku. They had. I mean, there was obviously something wrong with his car, but the bouncing on his car was so bad that they just retired it in the end. But I think that was a specific thing rather than just a generic Aston Martin bouncing thing. Lewis Hamilton, 15.8, 3.23. And at this point, you're thinking, maybe this is a bit like the old days when, there is a parallel here, believe me. When Nigel Mansell was driving for Renault in 1984, they had twin turbos, quite small, pretty good throttle response, and he was at the front of a few Grand Prix doing almost winning races. And then the back end of 84 he got into the Williams Honda for the first test at Donington, still wearing his JPS overalls, and he couldn't believe the throttle lag on the Honda engine. It was just like ridiculous. And at that point Honda's way of developing the engine was just to go to bigger and bigger turbos, more and more power. And the first thing Nigel did was obviously talk to Patrick and say, look, what Renault have done is actually gone to smaller turbos, twin turbos admittedly, but smaller and smaller, just to get rid of the throttle response. And immediately they did that at Honda. It made it a drivable race car. So what they lost in power, they gained in it being drivable and the drivers having confidence. And looking at that lap time of Lewis Hamilton, you're thinking maybe they've raised the ride height, maybe they've taken some downforce out of the car, maybe it's not overall as quick as it should be given the computer analysis of what that car in theory will do around Canada. But maybe because it's an easier car to drive now with less bouncing, Lewis can actually be a racing driver again and do amazing things. So that's what maybe 15.8 on that first run out of the pits, if you like, in Montreal on a dirty track. Top speed 3.23 as well. And again, you think, well, maybe that's a toe. But guess what? He was that quick in the second session as well. Don't want to give it away. But yeah, you know, kind of thinking, yeah, maybe this is a blessing in disguise, all this regulatory stuff. Vettel 16.0. Daniel Ricciardo up, you know, sort of building on where he was in Baku, kind of there or thereabouts with Lando, a little bit ahead on this occasion. Pierre Gasly always there. And then we did the fuel runs. Let's look at the fuel runs in FP1. Max Verstappen again, unbelievable. I mean, look at that, 18.4, 18.9, 18.4, 18.5, 18.5, 20.4, 18.6, 18.3. I mean, it's just like everybody else go home. Sergio, you can see from Sergio's times that he's just not feeling as comfortable in the car. And a couple of times on full with a heavy load of fuel, he was saying, you know, the traction is really bad. I can't get on the traction. The back end's all over the place. And that's because it's mainly third, fourth gear corners in Canada where he's driving the car now. And that's why Max is so good at just balancing the car all the time on tiptoes, really. So yeah, back to normal, I'd say, for Max and Checo. And then the two Ferraris and Charles Leclerc, not that far away from Max, but it just looked to be a little bit more of an effort. They're all on the medium tyre here, 19.5, 18.7, 18.8, 18.3, yeah, quick time. 18.5, 18.7, 18.6, 18.9, 18.9. You know, he's there, and Carlos, you know, about where he is relative to Charles as well on this relatively normal racetrack, if you can call it that. And I put the two Mercs in there just to show, by comparison, what they were doing with fuel. Lewis 19.1 was actually quicker than George. He did two 19.1s, and then I don't know if he had traffic or whatever. And George doing low 19s, but not 19.1. So, you know, from there you'd think, you know, not too bad, eh? You know, Lewis looking quite good. So that was FP1. FP2, obviously the track got a bit quicker, but there was a certain urgency about it because of the possibility of rain. And again, Max just out of the pit lane like a jackrabbit, and really, really good again. I mean, his whole practice session today went according to a perfect plan, I would say, at Red Bull. I'd say it's the most trouble-free, nicest looking practice he's had all year, really. So 14.1 he did. That was on a brand new set. He did one run on soft, then he did another one, 14.1. Top speed 3.24. I mean, look at that. Charles Leclerc did a 14.2. But again, I've got to say, you know, it looked like he was asking a little bit more from the car when he did that. This is all on the soft tyre. Carlos 14.3. Vettel looking very quick all of a sudden in the Aston 14.4. Fernando again, right up there, 14.5, 3.22 on the straight. Amazing, the Alpine right now. Well, the Alonso Alpine. Esteban Ocon, okay, but all of a sudden, Fernando and Alonso looking brilliant in that car. Love watching him drive as well. He was just, the flow and the rhythm he had around the circuit. Third, fourth gear corners, it just, you know, bread and butter for Fernando Alonso. He loves it. Pierre Gasly, 14.8, yeah, good. And then George, 14.9. And here we see Lewis starting to be not quite as comfortable with the car as he appeared to be. I'm only saying appeared, I've no idea really. But that's what he looked like in the morning. He looked relatively comfortable. In the afternoon, as the circuit is picking up grip and it is gusty out there, he does a 15.4 to George's 14.9. And, you know, all of a sudden he's back in the pack again, big time. Lando Norris, 14.9. A fairly quiet session for Lando. Daniel, 15.0, just a little bit behind on this occasion. Ocon. And Perez starting to lose confidence, I would say, because all of a sudden he's driving Sergio Perez, Monaco winner, Baku, mega quick, and now he's suddenly finding the car's quite difficult to drive, and he's midfield, and it's kind of getting worse, not better at this stage for him. And should point out here that Yuki Tsunoda is starting from the back of the grid after an engine change, but Charles Leclerc, after his blow up in Baku, was able to get another engine, obviously, but they're not doing a penalty for that, but it will for sure have its effect further down the cycle for Ferrari, and the same with Kevin Magnussen with his engine failure, Ferrari engine failure. 2. So then we went to it was a very well balanced day, if you like, soft runs and then fuel runs, soft runs and then fuel runs. I say soft, Fernando Alonso didn't run softs in that first one. And again, Fernando on the hard tyre on the fuel run, and I've actually elevated him to be one of the guys that we look at with the fuel runs because he was so impressive, I thought. Everybody else swapping. Max is on the medium, as you can see, Charles on the soft, Carlos is on the soft but went to the medium 2/3 of the way through. Sergio's on the medium, George on the medium, and Fernando on the hard. And again, look at Max. I mean, that talk about consistency and just being completely at home with everything. Look at those first 4 laps, sort of Carlos Reutemann-like, when he's sort of 5 minutes off the pace and then does 4 laps, 5 minutes off the pace, and then does 1 lap sort of 3/10 quicker than anybody else on the planet when nobody's looking. He used to love doing that. And it's a bit like that with Max today. He was just floating around trying to find a gap in the traffic with a heavy load of fuel and just letting everybody go and, hey, what's going on? How are you? Don't worry, be happy. 36.0 and then a 17.8, 19.3, and he ended with a 17.9 just for good measure. That's a really good run on the medium tyre. And Charles Leclerc is doing, more or less the same times. You could say just a fraction slower, but look, he's on the soft tyre. So, I mean, you can say good that the soft tyre has that sort of life, but, really, it's very impressive how quick Max is on the medium compared with Charles on the soft. Again, Carlos Sainz, good job. No errors today. A few runoff areas and stuff, but that's normal. 17.9, yeah, good. He was quick on the soft, actually slightly quicker than Charles, so he's right there. Nobody touched the wall. I'm not saying that in the context of Carlos Sainz either, the famous wall of fame on the start-finish line, but we will see what happens tomorrow. And there's Sergio again, on the medium tyre, take an average he's doing 18.2, 18.5, 18.5, 18.1. Yeah, he's kind of there, but I wouldn't have said he's got anything like the same balance. Well, not balance is the wrong word. Confidence in the car and the lap as Max at the moment. George, very good job by George today. I thought really good. I mean, at the end, Lewis said something along the. I have to say, I couldn't quite hear whether he said. He said, "Man, this car's." It sounded like not undrivable, but I think he meant undrivable. I think that's what he meant because he had a really tough day, afternoon anyway. So George 18.6, 18.9, 18.6, 18.7, that's pretty good. I mean, he's just giving it every lap. He's right on it. But then look at Fernando Alonso on the hard tyre. He's doing a 17.8 and he finishes with a 17.9 as well. I mean, this is potentially, if you think the Alpine's got a great top speed, and obviously now, whatever they're all running a little bit higher. At one point, Sainz was saying we had a lot of bouncing in the Ferrari this afternoon. So when that's happening, they're having to go higher with the ride height because they are going to be measuring at the FIA and to make sure there's not undue wear on the floor. We'll get on to that in a bit. But Fernando in that car, as it is now, he's got this sweet spot for sure. He's sort of in Sergio Perez territory, Monaco, Baku territory there. Just brilliant to watch him. So that's what happened in terms of numbers and action on the track. But of course, there's another side to the Canadian Grand Prix. Of course, while this Canadian Grand Prix is very welcome back on the Formula One calendar, everybody loves Montreal. It would also be remembered as we go ahead in time as the Grand Prix in which the technical regulations were significantly changed just before the weekend, just before the 3-day weekend. And that's a big thing for Formula One in 2022. We've seen it in the past. I mean, most notably, obviously going right back to 1969, high wings were banned midway through the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. And we've seen it at other times. But these days, you expect Formula One to be very stable in the way it develops its cars, its sport, its safety, and all other key aspects of the industry. But not in this case. There is this very sudden change to the regulations, which affect all the teams. They affect them differently, of course. And the bottom line is vertical oscillations, bouncing, but also over curbs as well. The FIA are going to try to limit that to an acceptable limit in terms of what the human body can take. And this was all brought to a head, of course, by Lewis Hamilton climbing out of his Mercedes after the Baku Grand Prix and holding his back, barely able to get out of the car, the 7 times world champion. And of course, from many perspectives, this is a good thing. Nobody wants to see the drivers going through any more pain than they go through already driving Grand Prix cars. It's a very, very physical two-hour sport in which they partake. But the problem is for Mercedes now that the rules as they are at the moment, they're going to inspect the floors, they're going to inspect the skid plates, and if there's sign of excess wear, in other words, sign of excess oscillation to a number to be agreed, then that car could potentially be excluded from the Grand Prix. And so the quick fix solution to that for a team like Mercedes, which does have very severe bouncing if they run low to the ground, which they try to do all the time, and very, very stiff, of course. The problem for Mercedes is that the quick fix solution is to take downforce out of the car, and that will stop the bouncing and will make the car more acceptable over curbs. But that will, of course, take away a lot of performance, particularly at Mercedes, where the car is a very high downforce car, which is why it has so much porpoising issue. But for Lewis Hamilton, it's going to be, I'm going to have a slightly easier ride in the true sense of the word, in the Canadian Grand Prix. But my Mercedes might be even less competitive than it has been in recent races, and I need to be ready for that. Of course, the straights at Montreal are pretty long, as we've seen already in practice, and that is one of the areas where Mercedes will, of course, pick up speed, because they've been horrendously slow in a straight line because they have so much drag from the downforce. So they're taking downforce out of the car. They will pick up relative top speed, I say relative to other teams, of course. But the real issue here is in what the FIA want to do next from the Canadian Grand Prix onwards into what they call the medium term, which could be a couple of races from now, could be 5 races from now, who knows. But in the medium term, they basically want the teams to get together to come up with a solution to the problem. So there's less bouncing and the cars can continue to be developed in the way we want them to be developed, the fans want them to be developed, but without any bouncing issues. And that, of course, is a real issue, because if Ferrari and Red Bull, and it's not even an if, it's a given, have created a car that has very little bouncing compared with Mercedes and much more overall downforce, efficient downforce, they are not going to want to give away any of that advantage to teams that haven't been able to find the solution to the downforce versus bouncing problem. So imagine Adrian Newey saying, yeah, well, we've worked really hard over the last 12 months to get this package at Red Bull, but we really understand the problems you're going through, James Allison, that is, at Mercedes. So yeah, we'll go to a much lower level of regulation and downforce to make it easier for you to get to the ceiling of that level. Imagine Adrian saying that. Not in a million years. I mean, to me, this is get out the GoPros, get out the mics, because we've got to film these meetings. It's going to be the best television ever in the history of Formula One to see Red Bull and Ferrari being told that they need to come down in the spec of their regulations in order to help the other teams come up. That's effectively what they're asking, the FIA are asking the teams to do. I don't think there's any way that's going to happen. Well, it certainly won't happen without a major fight, that is for sure. But in the meantime, it is a question of Red Bull will have to take some of their oscillation out. Ferrari will have to take some of their oscillation out to give them a reasonable ride, which they've done. But Mercedes is going to have to take a lot more out of their car, in effect, to get to the same position. So it's probably going to hurt Mercedes more initially than it is Ferrari and Red Bull.